He thought it was just an old letter. He didn't know it held the one thing his father had never said, the one phrase he had longed to hear his entire life. And by the time he found out, it was tragically, irrevocably too late. This story begins in the quiet, green village of Umwaka, where a young man named Nnamdi lived with a heart heavy with resentment. For as long as he could remember, his father, Obinna, had been a distant figure. He was a man carved from silence and discipline, his presence filling a room without a single word. Obinna was strict, his face a mask of sternness, and never once, not in all of Nnamdi's years, had he uttered the words, "I'm proud of you." This silence wasn't just an absence of words. It was a vast, echoing void in Nnamdi's life. He saw other fathers laugh with their sons, clap them on the back, and boast about their achievements. But his own father seemed to see him only as a series of duties to be fulfilled, a responsibility to be managed. Nnamdi excelled in school. He was respectful. He did everything he was told, always hoping that one day, just one day, it would be enough to earn a sliver of warmth, a nod of approval. But that day never came. The years passed, and the silence between them solidified. What started as a child's yearning for affection slowly hardened into a young man's bitter resentment. Nnamdi began to interpret his father's silence not as a personality trait, but as a judgment. He felt unseen, unvalued, and deeply unloved. The wall between them grew brick by silent brick, until it was so high and so thick that no words could possibly pass through. Then, word came that Obinna had fallen ill. It wasn't sudden, but a slow, creeping sickness that began to steal the strength from his formidable frame. Nnamdi's relatives urged him to visit, to sit by his father's bedside. "He is your father," they would say, "go to him." But Nnamdi couldn't. The wall he had built for his own protection was now his prison. How could he go to a man who had been a stranger his whole life? What would they even say to each other now? The years of unspoken feelings, of perceived neglect, were a chasm too wide to cross. So, Nnamdi stayed away, convincing himself it was what his father would have wanted anyway: distance, silence. He told himself it was a matter of pride, a refusal to beg for an affection that was never freely given. In reality, he was afraid that even on his deathbed, his father's silence would be the final, crushing confirmation of his worthlessness. One night, the rain fell in heavy, relentless sheets against the windows, a sound that seemed to mirror the turmoil in Nnamdi's soul. The world outside was a blur of gray and black. That was the night the news came. A cousin arrived, his face grim, his clothes soaked. The words were few and final. His father was gone. The funeral was a somber affair, filled with the quiet weeping of relatives and the smell of damp earth. Nnamdi moved through it all like a ghost, his heart a confusing mix of sorrow, relief, and a profound, gnawing emptiness. He had lost a father he felt he never truly had. Days after, he was tasked with sorting through his father's old belongings. The room smelled of camphor and thyme, a scent that was uniquely his father's. There, in a small wooden box filled with old documents and keepsakes, Nnamdi found it, a sealed, cream-colored envelope. On the front, in his father's familiar, strong handwriting, was his name, Nnamdi. His hands trembled as he held it. A letter? From his father? A lifetime of silence, and now, a letter from beyond the grave. A wave of anger, hot and fierce, washed over him, eclipsing any curiosity or grief. "Now you write to me?" he whispered, his voice cracking with bitterness. "After all these years? When it's too late to say anything back? When you can't see the hurt in my eyes?" The letter felt like a final, cruel joke. Another act of control, another one-sided conversation where his father held all the power. In a moment of raw, blinding pain, Nnamdi walked to the hearth where a small fire still flickered, embers glowing in the dim light. He didn't hesitate. He threw the letter into the flames. He watched as the paper curled, the edges blackening. He saw his name, the last thing his father had written to him, twist and disappear into smoke and ash. Gone. Just like that. For a fleeting second, he felt a sense of release, of finality. He had rejected his father's last word, just as he felt his father had rejected him his entire life. A few days later, still reeling from his actions, Nnamdi went to visit his aunt, his father's younger sister. She was a kind woman who had always tried to bridge the gap between him and Obinna. She sat him down, her eyes full of a gentle sorrow. After a long moment of silence, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. It was identical to the one he had burned, cream-colored, sealed, with his name on the front. "This was meant for you," she said softly. Your father gave me a copy. He was worried you might not be ready to read it. He knew you were angry. Nnamdi froze, his blood turning to ice. He stared at the letter in her hand, then back at her face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He took the envelope, his fingers numb. With trembling hands, he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a short note in his father's unmistakable script. He began to read. My son, if you are reading this, I may not be here anymore. I am writing this because I know I was never good with words. The silence I grew up with, I thought it made me strong. I see now, too late, that it only made you feel unloved. The words blurred as tears sprang to Nnamdi's eyes. He read on. The truth is, Nnamdi, everything I ever did, everything I ever worked for, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, it was all for you. The farm, the house, the money for your schooling. I did it all so you would have a better life than I did. I watched you grow into a good, intelligent man, and my heart was full. You were always my pride, even when I couldn't find the words to say it. A sob broke from Nnamdi's chest, a raw guttural sound of a heart breaking wide open. He couldn't breathe. The letter fell from his hands. He ran. He ran from his aunt's house, back through the village streets, the world a watery blur. He didn't stop until he burst back into his father's house, back into the room where he had committed his final, devastating act of anger. He fell to his knees before the cold hearth, before the pile of gray ash that was all that remained of the first letter. He reached out and let the ashes run through his fingers, as if he could somehow piece the words back together, as if he could undo what he had done. But it was impossible. He wept. He wept for the boy who had craved his father's approval. He wept for the young man who had let bitterness poison his heart. He wept for the father who had loved him fiercely but silently, a love expressed not in words, but in sacrifice. The realization hit him like a clap of thunder. His father's love had been there all along, woven into the fabric of his entire life, hidden in the silence, in the hard work, in the things left unsaid. And he, in his pain, had been completely blind to it. Now, it was gone forever. He had burned the original expression of that love, and the man who wrote it was no longer there to tell him again. Outside, the rain began to fall once more, a soft, steady rhythm against the roof. It sounded like tears, his father's tears perhaps, washing away all the years of anger, leaving behind only the vast, hollow ache of regret. The words he had longed to hear had finally come, but they served only as a permanent, heartbreaking echo in a world that was now, forever, silent. Thank you so much for watching. This story is a powerful reminder to look for love in actions, not just in words, and to mend bridges before it's too late. If this story touched you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content that makes you think and feel. We'll see you in the next one.